We'll now start our little brief discussion. We'll open it up. I will point out, lads, even though that the STT report for Artemis 3 didn't necessarily include future uh, future missions, that the traceability matrix did have some feed-forward applicability to sustained lunar surface exploration presence, and the risk of shilling for the Lunar Exploration Analysis Group. The United States Lunar Exploration Roadmap, maintained by LEAG, does actually have a prioritized, community vetted, and time phased approach for how to which investigations and which activities are important to help promote sustainable lunar exploration.
I'm sorry, so was someone just asking a question, or was that the end of the question? I was just going to mention, even if you guys have any kind of samples of the finer materials you want to manufacture with, even the tiniest one, there's a way to test it and like see the coherency of it, in the process. Just like a tiny bit of it. You wouldn't need much, right? Because we can do it on a molecular level. So this thing's going to fall apart or not, kind of, you know what I mean? From a molecular structure.
Yeah, I mean, we do have samples from Apollo, so there's a lot we do know about regolith.
Right. Right. Yes. So yeah. So someone could definitely test it and say this is going to hold together, or maybe it won't.
Yeah, and people are doing experiments to do, larger experiments. You want to use simulants. Getting appropriate simulants has been, well, there's a whole discussion about that.
Yeah. Absolutely, for sure, for sure. I just thought I'd bring it up because it's easy to test a tiny sample.
Yeah, I'd like to address, Barbara's question in the chat if I could. Asking about, kind of why are we talking about ISRU from Artemis 3 and this sort of idea of this mobile infrastructure for Artemis and that being discussed at the top levels. And I think what Laz said is important is, we're missing an opportunity if we don't consider this this kind of exploration from the beginning, or this possibility from the beginning, and that is in the big picture, and that is in the discussion point, and that's why we're bringing it to the community in this forum, is to keep that in mind. So I hope that kind of addresses, but if we want to take the discussion further on that, we can.
Yeah, Julie, I'm on board with this. I'm not a doubter. I'm trying to clarify, as the program constraints go forward, how we make sure that this is, something that's relevant and that we plan for and keep it in the plan. So I'm trying to get, I'm trying to get away from this is important, we should do it, and more towards here's how we're going to execute it within the plan that we have. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And it's sort of shifting sands at this point, so it's hard to do, but I do appreciate the question, and that's part of what we're pushing on here. So yeah.
Are you aware, anyone out there, of some comments Jim Free made last week? And specifically, he said that NASA is trading the concept of a single Artemis base camp with multiple smaller camps for greater flexibility.
Yeah, we're aware of that, Jim. I think that's a key point. There's a difference between the so-called distributed base camp, concept, and the mobile base camp, and which isn't really a base camp. It's more of a mobility-driven architecture. So there's yeah, we're aware of it. It's presently in the trade. It's definitely in the trade phase for evaluations being considered.
Is there a point of time somewhere down the road that a decision will be made which option is going to happen? I mean, we're going to have to do it. Decisions got to be made somewhere. Is there a timeline for that at all, Sam?
I'm not necessarily aware of one, just in the future, and not, it's not necessarily as clear an answer as some people might expect. Let's put it that way.
Okay, thanks.
It's going to require a lot in the hardware and architecture to come into more sharper focus.
Yeah, they're doing various trades that will go into updates to an architecture description document that will be made public at a future date. May not be for a year from now, but they're definitely assessing the schedule and the trades to get us there to make more public along those lines.
And the question I had, and I kind of asked some of it yesterday about landing site down selects, not regions, but landing sites when we get to that point. I know we're not there even close to that right now, but at some point we're going to have to be there, obviously. But is there documentation out there, or is it just so many factors? I'm curious, is once a landing site is selected for a mission, we have a launch window. How long is that site good for with illumination and stuff? Say we have a couple scrubs on the pad, or the crew's in orbit and they have to delay the PDI burn for an orbit or so, and they're going to be in what is it, 6.5 day orbit around the moon, if I recall right. That if something happens, issues, and Apollo had these things, several missions, some delays for landing. What does that do to the site in terms of the illumination, which is critical? And to me, we're going to have backup sites, obviously, but I'm just wondering how these things are all going to come to play and focus. I really understand it's early, but at some point, this stuff's got to start gelling.
For Artemis 3 specifically, I think that's, why we've advertised we're not going to be just one site, because we need to be mindful of that illumination. So the number of sites is still TBD, but the thought is a little bit along the temporal lines of the add illumination in the lunar surface, that for if we launch within these 3 months, it will be this site. If we launch within the next 3 months, it will be this site. So definitely more to come as we dig into the data and what that means to us for site selection.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I'm scrolling through the chat. Are there any other? Let's see here. There's some interesting questions in the chat.
Okay, like maybe you can treat the sites almost like a seasonal thing. In other words, like if this one passes, well, then this is the next one in this. You know what I mean? Even if it's a micro season, you know what I mean? And look at it from some angle like that. If I'm,
There's a question, good question here, Laz, from Fred Califf about how deep do you actually have to go with some of your geotechnical investigations? Laz, how did you have an instant answer for that?
Well, I'll give a not entirely well thought out answer very quickly, and that's to first cut. It's what depth we think we can be working to. So yes, just walking on the surface gets you one bit of information on the top few centimeters, but that's why, especially when we're talking about the regolith properties, whenever we do anything in the third dimensions, pushing in cores, if we do any drilling, digging trenches, any of that stuff, that's really valuable opportunities to learn about the properties going down at the depth that, what Julie was talking about. We probably, for the earlier missions, are talking about going down a meter. So anything that tells us about not just the top few centimeters, but that top meter is going to be helpful quickly. And then, yes, we want to know more about even deeper than that, and size experiments and so forth can help with that. But in near term, for things that we're going to use, it's probably that top meterish. So that's a quick answer.
There is a very interesting question here from Hannes, which I'll ask in our last minute here. Both, and this is a good question both for Julie and Laz. Did any one of the candidate regions show more potential for ISRU from your perspectives than others? Or were they all roughly equivalent?
Well, I'll jump in on that because we did make an attempt at least to evaluate the original 6 sites. I did not go into all of the Artemis 3, the 13. Um, there was certainly a better, Jerry in the chat mentioned Goldilocks, and then there was certainly some that had more opportunities to meet that just in the availability of the slopes or the sunlight or and the accessibility of some of those permanently shadowed regions. So there was certainly some that kind of bubbled up a little bit there. Um, but there's still a lot of work and as talked about in the chat that needs to be done in terms of resource assessment and seeing where the water actually is and the reality of what's in those PSRs. So I hesitate to do a full ranking or give a favorite, but certainly there's a base camp, there's a potential region that kind of bubbles to the top for that one, and it's certainly viable for ISRU. But I think there's possibilities at all these sites. So that's my best non-answer.
I'll say what Julie said. The truth is, I have not looked in detail at these sites trying to find those Goldilocks zones like Julie has. They all have interesting features to them. It need to do that analysis to see if they're all within range of how far you can walk on Artemis 3.
Well, thank you both. That was a very interesting discussion as we start to dive down deep into these regions.